Yeah, but
thanks. Welcome to Utilon, everyone. I'm very excited to see so many of you here. That wasn't a sarcastic remark. I'm very glad so many of you turned up. Yeah, I'm gonna like say some preliminary stuff before we kick off. If you didn't sign in on that like Google Doc over there as you're leaving, just please do. It like helps you get a sense of how many people turned up. Plus, I will send you a follow-up email making sure that you sign or like fill in the feedback form. We have another one of these events happening on the 17th of November. Rowan Lund is coming down to talk about family empowerment media. So it's like a global health charity. Should be fun, just as this is going to be fun. Okay, some things about Utilon if you've never come before, even though we just had one of these. You can do whatever you like. Me and Jodi are going to speak for 40 minutes, but like, if your house is on fire and you need to leave, like, feel free to do so. This is not a class. You can leave. You can come back. Do whatever you like. Help yourself to another cookie, if you so choose. So I'm gonna talk with Jodi about 40 minutes, and the questions I'm gonna ask, maybe it's absolutely terrible. It's the worst questions you've ever heard in your entire life, which is great because then you get 20 minutes to ask your own questions. We'll probably not do follow-up questions. I think that like probably takes up too much time. I'm not sure, Jodi, will you stick around a bit after this, or do you need to head off?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you got like follow-up questions, you can just like come to Jodi afterwards and like ask them. If people want to go to the pub, I'm not going to, but if you're like, oh, hey, I want to go to the pub, who wants to join me? Like, someone do that, because that'd be good, because socializing. We're also in the third week of our fellowship, which is basically a reading group about effective altruism. If like this is your first time hearing about this stuff, and you sort of like what we're talking about, you like want to learn more about effective altruism, you still can just like sign up and just like email me. So like if you want, you can just like email. Or just like email hello@eabristol.org. That's a pretty simple thing to remember. Or just like ask us on Instagram or something. You can probably find us.
And we'll send it out in the email.
We'll send it out in the email. Thank you, Scarlett. Cool. Also, at the end, I'm gonna like put up a big QR code that says feedback. Please fill it out. I don't know if any of this stuff is good. Maybe at the end you're just like, goodness, this Gaurav is terrible at this stuff. That's good information to know. Maybe you're like, Utilon sucks as a name. That's also good information to know. I would just prefer to know this stuff, so I will like put that up at the end, and like before you leave, just please fill it out. Cool. I'm not gonna take a seat. Also, I'm just gonna make sure this stuff is recording. Yeah, that should be working. Cool. All right, today we have Jodi Darwood. Jodi is a campaigns coordinator at the Humane League UK. She previously worked for Compassion World Farming and has a master's degree in animal law and society from I cannot pronounce the university's name.
The Autonomous University of Barcelona.
Brilliant. And before that, Jodi did a degree in geophysics from Imperial College London. Jodi's here to talk to us about the Humane League, sort of animal advocacy work, and all that jazz. So please give it up for Jodi. Okay, so I want you to imagine sort of like a hypothetical situation. You're at a party. Things that happen at a party happen. As you come up to a stranger, and they say, Jodi, what do you do? And then you say, I work at the Humane League. And then the next question is, what is the Humane League?
Okay, absolutely. That's a really good question. So I think the best place to start is with the Humane League's goals. So the Humane League is an animal protection organisation with a goal to end the suffering of animals farmed for food. So that is the end goal. We work on a series of campaigns, mainly corporate campaigns and political advocacy campaigns, to drive change for animals. And that looks like a lot of different things. Some of our work is working on driving incremental change, so welfare improvements for animals within, for example, company supply chains. And then on the other side, we're also trying to secure improved laws and legislation at a governmental level for farmed animals. most importantly, we're really clear that our end goal is that no animal suffers for food and that people leave animals off of their plates. And so we also do a lot of work trying to raise awareness about the issues faced by farm animals, the alternatives that are available for people in terms of consumption. So to really try and kind of put the alternatives out there into the public.
And then the person goes, "Wow, that's incredible. But why is all this like factory farming stuff bad? Like, why do you want to end it? What's like the purpose of that?"
Yeah, okay, definitely. I think, and I'm sure you all know what factory farming is or intensive farming, but the most important thing is to touch on the issue. So we're talking billions of animals being farmed for food in an intensive way. So putting in the minimum amount of resources possible to get the most food out possible, and that seems to completely forget that these are like living, sentient, feeling, thinking animals that are being subjected to this treatment. So one way that I like to look at it is we're trying to fit animals to a system rather than fitting the system for the physiological needs of these animals. And the suffering and the scale of the suffering and the intensity of the suffering that causes is unthinkable, and that's what we're working to change. Does that answer your question about intensive farming?
Well, yeah, and the guy that probably goes, "Wow, this is incredible," and goes vegan. So yeah, one of the things you like pointing out is that you have these sort of focus areas where you're trying to do incremental change, you're trying to push policy and like also make people aware of what's on their plate. Yeah, I guess like which one of those do you like focus on the most? Do you give all of them sort of like equal focus? Is it the sort of like incremental changes, systemic changes that you like apply more of your resources towards, and then sort of let the other stuff, let like other sort of animal advocacy organizations take over that, or do you like place equal focus on all of them?
Yeah, okay, that's a really good question. I would say the bulk of the Humane League, the UK and internationally, successes have been on corporate campaigns, and that's because we do focus a lot of our resources and energy into those campaigns. But I don't think it's as easy as that, because if you're working on corporate campaigns, we're also thinking simultaneously about how can we use this to raise awareness, how can we make people more conscious of their consumption choices. So I think they're all very interconnected, and that's why we do need to devote resources to all three of those. And that's something that, so for example, we're working increasingly now on the political sphere, because we see the impact that we can have doing those two, so for example the corporate and the political campaigning simultaneously.
What sort of like political campaigns are you trying to have?
Yeah, sure. So, well, when I say political, I should comment that as a charitable organisation, a registered charity, we can't be political in terms of party politics. But what I mean there is, for example, our Forgotten Fishes campaign is calling for fish to be protected legally in the same way that land farmed animals are. So that's one example. Another one is what we call our Beatrice campaign, Beatrice being the name of a hen that was rescued from a cage farming system, is again asking the government to implement legislation to ban the use of cages for hens, for example.
So, well, taking the other side of the sort of campaigns, like one of the things you focus on is just like making corporate changes, like getting companies to change their, like to go cage free or to like improve their conditions on factory farms. I'm like curious as to like, so yeah, one thing that when I look at the Humane League's website, it looks like there's a lot of like success with these things of like, yes, things are moving in the right direction. But I'm like curious as to like, when you try to do these campaigns to get companies to change, like how successful are you? Like how easy is it to actually get these companies to change? Like is there a stage where some companies just don't listen and they don't like to listen, and then maybe you like push into like sort of protesting outside, and then that's sort of the way you go about things? Or
yeah, definitely. So the first part of that is kind of identifying your campaigning targets. So we never kind of decide one morning, like, you know what, I saw this horrible product in the supermarket, let's campaign against them. You really need to look at the company, the sector that company's in, so like the food service sector, the like retailers, so supermarkets, what your impact could be. So what share of the market do they represent, for example? How many animals in their supply chain can you affect? And then once we've kind of mapped that out, we've identified the areas where we can drive change, where we feel that it's possible to drive to change. We can then look at the individual companies and which ones would be best to target, which ones are most able and likely to do RR. So for example, one of the things that we're working on at the moment is the Better Chicken Commitment. So it's trying to raise the bar of standards for meat chicken farming. And in that process, we have a corporate relations team who have talks with the industry, so with the suppliers, with the company themselves. So yeah, it is very much, we don't go out publicly protesting against a company from the off. We hold talks with them, we kind of explain to them how they can make this change in their supply chain, what it will look like, how much it will cost, things like that, the logistics. And then if we feel that, if those kind of behind the scenes conversations are not successful, and the company is resistant to making the changes that need to be made, that's when we would then campaign publicly and then start doing the tactics like protesting, so putting pressure on a company and its brand to make the changes required. And again, that involves raising awareness of the issue, because otherwise when you go public, people aren't going to know like why they should care about that problem.
Do those like behind the scenes talks, do they usually work out the first time around? Are they like is it usually easy to get companies to like listen to the community?
It definitely, I'd say first of all, yes. I think a lot of the successes happen, a majority of the successes happen behind the scenes, because we have a good argument. We're not doing it to to be antagonistic or anything like that. We believe that what we're asking for is an ethical imperative, that the way that we shouldn't be trying to increase profits through the suffering of animals. So we have a good argument. We present it in the ways and terms that they want to hear it, and it is how most campaigns are won as such.
Are you like setting, so like you sort of have these conversations, like maybe it's a back and forth, and like, okay, this is what we want you to do, the company's like, okay, we'll listen to you, and like, what's then like the next step after they said, yeah, we'll listen to you, like how do you like, what's the process after that?
Okay, yeah, definitely. So once they've said yes, then it's the process of helping that company implement the change. So, for example, they should already know that they're in control of their own supply chain, know how to make the changes. But we are also in contact with suppliers. So in the UK, there's a very small number of companies that own the vast majority and supply the vast majority of meat chickens, for example, to supermarkets. So by having an open dialogue between those supplier companies, the companies that are buying and then selling, so like supermarkets, we can kind of help them map out how they're going to make that change. And then the next step is progress reporting. So also setting out kind of expectations for how they're going to report on that change. So it's not that they make a commitment in 2020, they say, oh yeah, by 2026 we'll have stopped, for example, buying eggs from caged farms, and then we don't hear anything until 2026, and then they say, oh no, we've not quite made it on time. It's very much maintaining an open dialogue and supporting that transition, whether it be removing cages from their supply chain or fast-growing chickens from their supply chain, things like that.
Right. When you if you're setting these targets, you're having this open dialogue between them. Like, curious as to Yeah, I'm like maybe unsure about like what incentives companies have to like properly listen to not like sort of like maybe they have this relationship with you, but they're sort of just like it's sort of going through the motions of like, yes, we'll speak with humanely, we'll like try and convince them that yeah, we're trying to hit these targets, but then just like go about doing what they do. I'm like unsure if there's like some form of like inspecting things along the way, if like you like can like verify that what they say they want to do, they're actually trying to do. I'm like not sure if that's actually very easy, but yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So an example in terms of you've mentioned like inspections and things like that. So the Better Chicken commitment that we're calling for, which I mentioned before, is that set standards that kind of raises the bar, raises the legal minimum for the farms. That includes part of making that commitment includes committing to third-party auditing. So in some instances, that's something that we build in. Some as a campaigning organisation, we don't have the resources for all of the commitments made to be inspecting all of the farms ourselves, and that's why we build in that kind of third-party auditing aspect to that. And then the reporting helps us as well, especially these are large companies. They have a lot of kind of corporate sustainability reporting, things like that. It's something that they should be doing like fundamentally that we're asking them to build in and add on.
Sorry, could you clarify what is the auditing process like? What does that include?
I must admit I can't give you the details of that off the top of my head. I would be happy to send those to you, or if anyone else wants to see them, I can send you the details. Normally, the auditing process requires things like a third party, so someone that is independent and completely separate from the organisation, for a supermarket, for example, that they will inspect a certain percentage of the supplier farms, and there will be a certain degree of spot checks in addition to planned inspections, and there's things like that need to be built into these commitments. And that's on top of a lot of supermarkets now, because of consumer pressure. They already have a degree of auditing in their supply chain, and it's building on that and enhancing that and drawing more public attention to it, so more people are aware that it's there and happening, and so it's more damaging to the brand if they're not doing it or they're not doing it well.
Cool. Does the Humanely have like some sort of like metrics it's trying to achieve? Like we like want these many companies to do X amount of things. Like I guess like because one thing I'm curious about is like how success is measured almost, and like when you're going about the work, you're like, this is what success looks like, and this is like, well, I guess you could just say like failure is like no one listened or whatnot, but like yeah, I'm like curious as to how that maybe process of like measuring things and measuring like the output of Humanely looks like, if you could share.
Yeah, definitely. So there are lots of metrics that you can use to measure the success of a campaign, and obviously that looks different when a campaign is ongoing to the end. So I think that the ultimate for us, the main thing that we look at, as you said, is the number of companies that we're getting to commit, but most importantly, the number of animals that we're affecting by getting a company to sign up. So for example, we're working on a supermarket campaign at the moment. We're asking them to sign a commitment, the Better Chicken commitment across Europe, and that would positively impact the lives of over, I believe, 200 million chickens. So that is what we're looking at. And so then you also have things like, and this is something that we look into when we're deciding on our campaigns, and our focus is that the degree of suffering of the animals that we're working on, which sounds really horrible, but you have to think about the intensity of the suffering. You have to think about the length of the suffering, how long these animals are going through that, and then the scale, so how many animals. And it's all of those three things that we look at when we're measuring success, and that's why the campaigns like the Better Chicken commitment, so moving from these really intensive farms they're really barren, they They use fast-growing chickens, they've been selectively bred, kind of like you talk about issues with dog breeds, like pugs and things like that can't breed. They've been selectively bred, which means they grow really quick, but they suffer intensely. We've done an investigation recently, and the footage is just shocking. And it's all of the chickens virtually, because they're all these fast-growing breeds. So by securing a pledge for those fast-growing chickens to get them to move away from those breeds, where the change is huge to their lives and ending that suffering. So yeah, definitely I would say one of the main metrics is the number of animals impacted and the impact on their intensity of suffering. And then we also have other measures. So for example, like salience of an issue, so things like surveys to track over time what the general public's awareness of farm animal issues, how much they care about that, their willingness to their opinion on the importance of the issue as compared to other key issues, and their willingness, for example, to pay for a few more pennies for a product for increased welfare because it's more important to them as an issue. So that's also something that's really important to look at. And then we can talk about in a bit about like the kind of during campaign metrics as well.
Yeah, I'd be curious, what is the during the campaign metrics?
Yeah, sure. I think it's really important when we talk about like making a campaign successful is putting metrics in place from the beginning that mean that you can adjust if you think that things aren't going to plan. And there's so many different things that you can look at. So I think from the off, if you're communicating with your supporter base, so things like your email mailing list, people on social media and in relevant groups that might be interested, what percentage of those people are opening our message? Are they like clicking through on the message? What's the conversion rate on petition signing? So it starts off quite things like that, quite small. So looking at message testing, we've communicated this problem in this way, or have two different ways, and then you can see, that message, we think it's really clear, but most people don't understand it because it's not converting things. So it's metrics like that as well that really help you to guide the campaign. And if you think, actually, our message isn't clear, people aren't taking action, that's going to then impact whether or not the company is feeling the pressure enough, the brand damage enough to make the change that you want them to.
Just gonna ask a stupid question just like a few minutes ago, which is like, it seems like the Humane League focuses like quite specifically on chickens, and then obviously moving to fishes. I'm like the guy in the party again, just like why just the chickens? Like why not focus on like a whole host of like animals, like from pigs to cows to whatnot?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think firstly, it's good to kind of pick an issue and do it really well as effective as possible. So we don't want to spread ourselves too thinly and be working on issues related to so many species that we therefore reduce our effectiveness in advocating for those species. And then it kind of goes back to what I was talking about before, taking into consideration the number of animals farmed, the scale of their suffering, and the length of their suffering. And chickens and fish, in particular meat chickens, known as broiler chickens in the industry, those the scale is shocking. We consume nearly 1 billion meat chickens a year in the UK, and I'm not sure of the numbers for farmed fishes in the UK and globally, but it's huge compared to land animals. So by focusing on those animals, we can change the lives of the greatest number of sentient beings possible, which is why that's our focus at present.
And so is it that you've now sort of like had this thing that sort of works with chickens where you like have corporate reforms happen, and so now you're like sort of pushing towards fishes and towards like maybe like different sort of like you can, once you've like figured something out, you can like maybe then push on different things, or is it just like you still, having figured something out, you still want to keep that sort of closed off to not like spread super quickly to like different type of animals?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think, well, I'll start with, when you're looking at the issues that we are, so we spoke about how we're focusing on meat chickens and fish at the moment. Another species, or not species, issue that we focus on is caged egg production. And I use that as an example because I saw a graph this week I thought was really cool. This is a campaign that's been going on for like 30 years now, more or less. Like globally, the movement as a whole has been working on trying to end caged farming, and in particular caged farming for hens for a really long time. And recently, I think in the last 5 years on this graph, the number of, in the UK for example, the number of caged farms is now less than the number of cage-free farms, so the lines crossed on the graph. And what I'm trying to get at there is that you can build momentum when we're in these movements. So getting the first company to sign up in an industry is really difficult because, as you said, what is their motivation? That now they're going to be the most expensive eggs because if they're the only one doing it that way. But once you've worked on it for a bit, you've got a few more companies to sign up, then you get the domino effect. So I think now all UK supermarkets have made a cage-free pledge to stop selling eggs sold from cages by 2025. I might be wrong on that, but so what I'm trying to get at is that for broiler chickens, we're a bit kind of later on that journey. I think the salience around the suffering of meat chickens is a bit less, but that is what we're working towards, getting to a point where so many companies, such a large proportion of the industry has signed up that you get that domino effect and it becomes the norm. And with regards to kind of moving to fish, fish farming is something that is relatively new. On the scale that we're doing it on, it's very new, and that's a big part of the problem. The legislation is 10 years behind where it should be in protecting these animals. Also things like knowledge and receptiveness about fish welfare and the fact that fish can feel and are sentient is something that isn't quite at the same level of recognition for other species. So that all kind of feeds into our decisions to focus on cages, broilers, and fish.
Yeah, I'm curious as to, we actually haven't talked about your day-to-day job, you being a campaigns coordinator. I'm like curious as to like what that looks like and what you get up to at the Humane League.
Okay, that's a good question. So the thing I love about being a campaign coordinator is that no 2 days are the same. It is very much like you've got to do whatever you can to achieve to put the pressure on companies basically to drive the change they want to see. So we spoke a bit earlier about the process in terms of behind the scenes conversation with our corporate relations team. So I'm not part of the behind the scenes conversations. I get to hear the outcome of those conversations. And then the next step is kind of when they've handed over to the campaigns team, they're saying this company's not going to do it behind the scenes because it's the right thing to do, so we need to put pressure on them, normally via like what is effectively a brand damage campaign, is making the consumers aware of what's really happening, which they're not being transparent about because it's damaging to their brand. So yeah, it's quite fun because I get to think of different, so it starts off with a strategy, so making you look at your long-term goal and your medium-term goal. So the long-term goal is that all suppliers in the UK or all supermarkets in the UK sign up to the Better Chicken Commitment. The shorter-term goal will be one supermarket signs up to the Better Chicken Commitment. Well, now we're going on to the third because M&S and Waitrose have. And then once we have that goal, then developing a strategy. So how long do we think it will take us? And like what tactics can you implement in that strategy to create the pressure that you want to create to get them to do what you want them to do, basically. So it's quite It's a lot of project coordination, so working with the we have a digital team, a design team, the corporate relations team to make sure we've got all our numbers and facts right, the research team to make sure we're everything that we're saying again with regards to the animals is factually correct. This like social media team, the media team, so bringing all of that together to implement the agreed upon strategy sums up what I do, I think, quite well.
Yeah, I'm like curious as to, and maybe this isn't a bit out of your job description, but like whether the Humane League plans on like expanding to different countries. It feels like there's a US branch and there's a UK branch, but they're not the same. This sort of factory farming is a global problem, and I wonder if the Humane League like plans to expand the way it does stuff to different countries.
That's a very good question, and I must admit that's probably a question more for the directors. And I imagine so. What I would like to add to that is that the Humane League founded something called the Open Wing Alliance. So we have offices, the Humane League offices in several countries, so the US, UK, Mexico, and Japan. But we also work with 90 plus organisations that have joined together to form this coalition or alliance called the Open Wing Alliance, and that we all work together. It's very collaborative. We skill share, resource share. We conduct campaigns as a unit, and that allows us to reach those different areas, consumers and markets, and help to drive change even in the countries that we don't have a THL office in.
Probably going to start taking audience questions. If you have any, raise your hand. And if you don't, I'll just ask more questions, which is great, because I still have questions. Scarlett, you have one? No, yeah, go for it.
I'm wondering if there's like a changing landscape, I think, in like the culture of the UK around animal advocacy, like more people are vegetarian and vegan, and with the rise of like artificial meats, it might be increasing. So this culture change might imply that like in 50 years, regardless of what the humanely do, all people will be vegan or vegetarian anyway, and I guess it might just be cheaper to be meat anyway. So do you like model this like change in landscape for the ethics of animal ethics in the UK to see the impact you might be doing if in 5 years time the company might change from their chickens to like artificial meat anyway, as opposed to like, or it might never happen? How like crucial do you think the work you're doing is?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the issue of that kind of speaks to the issue of whether we should be just promoting veganism as opposed to working on our like corporate campaigns. And that, as you said, people are becoming increasingly choosing to leave animals off their plate, and that is something that we are constantly looking at. But at the moment, it's not happening at as fast a rate as we would like to see. And in the meantime, we have, science tells us that we can, through changes to the way that animals farmed, we can have a big impact on their welfare. And we feel that it's an ethical imperative not to do that work while we were able to, in between now and when hopefully everyone is a vegetarian or a vegan. What I would like to say is that we think that that's a really important part of an organisation's work, and that we are also working to promote vegetarianism and veganism, leaving animals off your plate altogether, and that the combination of strategies, approaches, so organisations that are purely promoting veganism and those that are working to drive those incremental changes together can help achieve our goals as quickly as possible, basically. Do you feel that answers your question?
Yes.
Fantastic.
So would you weight the suffering of all types of animals equally? For instance, If you could replace some of the chickens being farmed with, say, insects, do you think that could ever be better, or would that also be bad to you?
Yeah, but that's the question of insect farming in particular is one that it's so important that we're looking into that and understanding the issues associated with it. I think that's a really difficult question to answer, and I would say that it's quite subjective in terms of whether you can say that all animal suffering is equal. I think we could say that the way that we try and fit certain species to our farms and our farming systems causes greater suffering to some species than others. But for insect farming, for example, there's still a lot of dispute, kind of like fish 10 years ago, on whether or not insects are sentient, whether they can feel, and obviously different insect species, we have more evidence that some insects are sentient than others. So there needs to be a lot of research into that in order to kind of make the case about not shifting to insect farming, basically. I personally believe that it's a really bad idea, or why we're just kind of passing the baton, we're shifting the issue from one species to another when we need to be moving away from consuming animals altogether.
Good. Yep, Scott.
Would you give any weight to the argument that if you improve conditions in factory farms, then the reason a lot of people go vegan is because they think the conditions are really awful. So if the conditions improve, then do you think there could be just a complacency in eating animal products that wouldn't drive the movement to stop eating animal products?
Yeah, I think it's a valid concern, and it's feedback that we receive a lot. So people that do strongly believe that. My position, I think the Humane League's position, is that the argument to leave animals off your plate is strong enough alone. I mean, for me personally, I feel it doesn't matter what system an animal is farmed in. I don't want to be part of that, of killing and consuming another living being. So I understand that point of view. However, I believe, and THL believes, that promoting veganism is important. But the argument for leaving animals off your plate is good enough alone, and that shouldn't stop us from working to improve the lives of the animals that are going inevitably to be in farms between now and the time that everyone leaves animals off their plates.
Peter.
Yes, I was just wondering about kind of what the future trajectory of the kind of corporate campaigning angle might be. So it seems like the kind of strategies like campaigning for cage-free raising of hens and things. This can work as long as the changes don't kind of raise the cost of producing the animal products by a very large amount. But at some point, we're going to run out of things like that. So I'm just wondering, at what point do you think the costs of actually improving the welfare is going to start increasing quite a bit more, and then we might start seeing more resistance from companies against putting in place these measures?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that when we are building the strategy and also the standards that we're asking companies to take on, there is that, unfortunately, that kind of trade-off of what changes do we want to see for the animals versus what is realistic in the current climate, including economic climate, so costs. On the other hand, things are changing all of the time, like different technologies, farming systems, things like that are appearing, and so the landscape changes, and that might change the overall cost, or for example, feed compositions, like what we can feed the animals and the cost of that feed and things like that. So it's something, I think, mostly that's just that you have to constantly be looking at, reporting on, analysing, and then adjusting as we proceed. Also, when we do have that argument of the cost, I think one thing that a lot of companies and also governments are not factoring in is the costs down the line. So, like the human health costs, the environmental costs. Like we're seeing a lot in the news about pollution, water pollution, river pollution, and the clear-ups that will need and things like that. So there's lots of factors that feed into whether an improvement is feasible, and that we need to be really mindful of that. I think also there are farming systems. So for example, the organisation that I worked for previously was promoting regenerative farming, and that's something that's already being done across the world, and that is and therefore is proven to be economically viable and affordable. So it's just being mindful of what the options are definitely in the changing landscape. But yeah, I would just say that that's something that our research team in particular are always keeping an eye on, and there's the state of the industry and what changes are feasible and possible.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about in terms of changing consumer behaviour, the tactics you've used that have been particularly successful. Because I was kind of under the impression, I think wrongly, that the Humane League and other sort of effective organisations had moved away from that kind of thing because it was notoriously difficult to change people's behaviour around this issue in particular.
Yeah, definitely. So, for example, one of the elements of that at the moment at the Humane League UK is our work to increase recognition of the issues facing broiler chickens, which would hopefully therefore help our corporate campaigns for broiler chickens, because more people are aware of the issues, and then in turn, because they're aware of the issues, they then maybe think twice about their consumption habits. So in terms of tactics, what that looks like mostly is things like what we're putting out in the media. So social media, getting stories in different media outlets, for example, to try and reach a wider range of people. But you're absolutely right, it is something that's quite difficult to do, and I think through someone put it to me once as someone at the Humane League, is that we have a bucket, like everyone has a kind of vegan bucket, and for some people, like it doesn't take that much to fill it up, and then they choose to change their habits. Whereas for other people, they need to see a lot of information and understand the issue a lot more to kind of recognise that there's a problem and be driven to change their habits. So what we're trying to do is it's about education of the issue, and then promoting that on our social media channels and through media, so news articles and things like that.
Cool. Anyone? Yeah.
When you're carrying out brand damage campaigns, how effective have you found those, and what sort of techniques you use?
Really effective. I would say, a lot of the campaigns that have been won by the Humane League and the Open Wing Alliance have been as a result of those kind of campaigns. And in terms of the tactics that we're using, it's things like, I don't know if anyone's seen that we're conducting a campaign against Lidl at the moment. We have undercover footage recorded in a Lidl supplier farm. So the first tactic was publishing that footage. We secured media coverage. It was in the Times, which has millions of readers, so we got really good coverage. So immediately, that's embarrassing to Lidl. There's some really horrible footage showing both illegal activity, but also legal, but just really horrible activity, and that's damaging to Lidl. So that's one tactic. Another one, so we have things like petitions asking people to call customer services. It's all about putting pressure on in as many different angles as possible, is the way I think to it. So maybe on a store level, holding protests outside of a store, and then sending messages to the CEO, for example, or the director of the company. Lots of different tactics, and then you have, so that's digital campaigning, on the ground campaigning as well. And oftentimes we try and start really hard, and a lot of companies commit in the first week because you've embarrassed them publicly immediately, and they make the commitment. On the other hand, you also need escalating tactics, so that if a company does resist, that there's more things that you can do to keep it interesting to the public and in the public domain, and therefore something that company feels is affecting them and that they should therefore care about.
Like, what would those be, the escalating techniques?
Yeah, definitely. So that's things like if you start maybe digitally, so with a petition, and you get 10,000 signatures on the petition, and then maybe you present that to the company, and they say, oh great, 10,000 people care about that, but we still don't want to make the commitment. And then perhaps you could hold a set of some store protests, for example, so then you've kind of escalated that, and then if they haven't responded, maybe some actions on social media. So one thing that I love that we've been doing recently is is quite big on like memes and things like that, so asking our volunteers to create memes, so you're kind of operating in the same sphere on social as their audience as well, to try and hit them in that way.
Just following on from that, you mentioned you uncovered some illegal activity. Do you then bring cases through the courts, or?
Yeah, that's right. So in this instance, the footage was secured by an Italian Spanish organisation, Equalia, and they have taken the legal route in the country that it was recorded. So this footage was from Germany, so to report that in the proper way, so that action can be taken against the perpetrators of the illegal activity in line with the law of that country. So in that instance, yes.
Cool. Yeah, go for it.
Just wondering about the political campaigns. You said they weren't involved in party politics, but does that mean kind of lobbying? Or?
Yeah, that's right. So it's just about who has the capacity, the ability to implement the laws or the changes that we want to see. So yes, things like we had a parliamentary reception earlier this year on the topic of farmed fishes and the welfare laws that we want to see. So at the moment, I think as I mentioned before, there's not as much recognition and acceptance of the issues facing farm fish and the fact that it's a problem. So through things like parliamentary receptions, we can raise awareness among MPs and increase our chances that they go on to vote for a provision to implement better legal protections for them.
Cool stuff. Jodi's going to stick around for a bit, so if you got more questions, you can ask her then. Do you have a way people can reach you if they want to ask questions?
Yeah, I can give you my email address. Maybe you can pop that in the follow-up email.
Cool. That's for Jodi, everyone. Now that I have you all trapped, I'm going to ask you to fill in the feedback form. It's a big QR code there. If you'd like to fill it out, that'd be very cool, because feedback is useful.
Is that going to be in your email?
That's also going to be in my email, so you will get it there. We'll specifically ask if you fill it out, actually, so that would be stringent.
Is
yeah.
it name and feedback? Okay.
The feedback is at the feedback form,